Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. It's entitled World Breastfeeding Week. We are really happy to have you here. And I would like to present myself. I'm Ligia Prodan. I'm the Journalist Relations Specialist for Journal Nutrients, and I will act as a host for today. I will like to briefly talk about the MDPI. So MDPI, as you may know, is an open access publisher. We are based in Basel in Switzerland, and we support academic communities since 1996. We have more than 400 diverse and open access journals, and we are committed to provide high quality service for all our authors. As for agenda for today, we will have 3 key speakers. The first one is Dr. Sheila Hirani, and she will present her presentation about breastfeeding during emergencies, challenges, and way forward to support mothers in disaster zone. The next one is Dr. Sylvia Ley. She will have the presentation about the role of lactation in cardiometabolic health, consequences among women. And for the third speaker, we have the presentation about developing the milk bank services for the future. At the end of the presentations, we have the Q&A part, followed by the closing of the webinar. I would like to, for the next part, some relevant special issues. This link will be sent via the chat during the webinar, and we have some organizers, 5 journals. We have the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. We have the Nutrients Journal, Biomedicines, Children and Healthcare. Also, you can put your questions in the Q&A box during the presentations of the speakers. And at the end of the presentations, we will answer them. When you put the questions, please also insert the name of the speaker so we may know whom to address these questions. For the next part, I would like to introduce Dr. Sheila Hirani. She is from the University of Regina, from Canada. She is also working in Pakistan and Canada. She was also awarded with, and her work was rigorously awarded. And she will also speak about the breastfeeding part. The second speaker is Dr. Sylvia Ley. She is from USA. She works in epidemiology, and she's from the University Tulane. As for the third speaker, we have Dr. Natalie Schenker. She is from UK, and she is the co-founder for the Human Milk Foundation. For the next part, I would like to give the presentation to our first speaker, Dr. Sheila.
Thank you so much for this introduction, and it's my great pleasure to be a keynote speaker in today's webinar. So I'm Dr. Sheila Hirani, Associate Professor at the University of Regina, Faculty of Nursing in Canada. The title of my today's presentation is Breastfeeding During Emergencies, Challenges and Way Forward to Support Mothers in the Disaster Zone. I would start my presentation with the land acknowledgement. I'm a South Asian settler on Treaty 4, the land of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. I appreciate the privilege I have been given to live, study, work, and raise my family on this beautiful land. I'm mindful of broken covenant and strive to make this right with the land and with each other. Disclosures. I acknowledge that there is no actual or potential conflict of interest. I would start my presentation with a kind of a background. And in this picture, you can see that there is a brain development and neuronal development in the child's life is happening right from the time when the mom is pregnant. But this neuronal connection and this brain development requires a kind of a great nutrition during the early years of the life. So I would say that early years are vital for the infant's growth and development, where maximum even 90% of the neuronal development happens in the first 6 years. And the first 2 years are highly sensitive and crucial time period in the child's life, where they require a very great support through the nutrition. So here I would say that the role of breastfeeding is quite crucial. There are many benefits of breastfeeding, and breastfeeding and the breast milk is something kind of a superior that we can always consider and we should be considering, because this is the safest, cleanest option for the baby, and it also contains the antibodies that even support the child's development of the brain, but also prevents the child from the variety of diseases. And it also promotes the infant's growth, establishes the maternal and child bond, and many research have proven that breast milk also has the analgesic properties. And during the procedural pain nowadays, like when the child would be breastfed at the same time when the minor procedures are performed, then even this is something a kind of a great distraction for the child. And even breast milk has the analgesic properties that even let the perception of the pain to be on a lesser end. And also on the long-term benefits, I would say that breast milk is vital for child's overall long-term impact. Especially it prevents non-communicable diseases and by preventing the obesity. And research has really proven this particular association as well. On the other hand, there are many dangers of formula milk. We all know that formula is an expensive option, but also the other pitfall of the formula as compared to the breast milk is that in the formula milk, whenever it's being prepared, we do need the supplies. And whenever we are using the water, the feeding water, the artificial teats, and the nipples, these actually hold the risk of contamination that can make the baby sick. And also, apart from the risk of infection, many babies are prone to the allergies and variety of intolerances. And even whenever like artificial teats or nipples are being used, children are at a very high risk of carrying forward the dental issues. And these are even prevalent. And even in the later in life, or even in the early years of life, like the obesity is something that is even highly reported. So, looking around the WHO guidelines around the use of the breast milk, I would say that WHO is highly recommended that the breast milk initiation should happen in the first hour of birth, and that's why we are emphasizing highly on the prenatal education so that mothers can actually have the skin to skin contact right after the birth and can right away initiate the breast milk kind of offering to the baby. And then from birth to 6 months, exclusive breastfeeding without using any other kind of the supplement like water, juices, solids, or honey is something not an ideal. So just exclusive breastfeeding in the first 6 months of life. And even child should be breastfeed on demand whenever they show the feeding cues. And there should be the continuation of the mother's milk up to and even beyond 2 years. So that's something and strong recommendation considering many benefits of breastfeeding and breast milk. Breast milk holds more benefits, and that's why even during the time of COVID pandemic, this was something highly recommended by the World Health Organization. So with that background information about breastfeeding, we all know that there are many breastfeeding benefits, and emergencies, disaster is a time period when even breast milk holds a kind of a superior importance. And why is that so? Because globally, each year, death of 760,000 children under the age of 5 is reported during the time of natural disasters, mainly due to the consumption of unsafe water and resultant waterborne diseases. And talking about some of the background information from the literature, promotion, protection, and support of breastfeeding is considered essential to prevent the malnutrition related mortalities among young babies, especially infants during the time of natural disasters. And whenever there is a suboptimal breastfeeding practice in those settings, there is a sudden rise in the child mortality rate during the time of disaster and displacement. So here I would like to share the picture of that how come infant mortalities and the whole cycle during the natural disaster and emergency, especially in the disaster relief zone happens. We all know that during the time of disaster, there are no clean supplies available, no clean water available. And whenever the babies are being formula fed during that time, this is a time period whenever there is some kind of a high risk of contamination. So in that situation, whenever there is an unmonitored distribution of formula milk and mothers are being offered to give the formula, this is something not something desirable, not an ideal at all. Especially during the time of natural disaster, we can see that babies who drink the contaminated milk are ending up into the diarrheas, dysentery, and there is a resultant malnutrition and death rate that really gets increased. So this is something which we have to really consider during the time of disaster, and breastfeeding and breast milk is an ideal option for the baby, which is not holding any kind of the risk of contamination, and even it is essential based on many benefits that I just shared in the previous slides. So we all know that there are many challenges associated with the breastfeeding during the time of disaster and displacement, and these challenges are prevalent globally. But looking into the context of low and middle income countries, these challenges are particularly problematic in these contexts. And in today's presentation, I would share my study from Pakistan that I undertook as a principal investigator, where the child mortality rate is already high and breastfeeding is something where most of the time mothers struggle. So Pakistan is one of the low middle income countries that is the second highest has the second highest infant and child mortality rate in South Asia. Pakistan is one of the South Asian countries that is sharing boundary with Afghanistan, China, India, and Iran. And in 2010, under 5 child mortality rate in Pakistan was reported as 86 per 1,000 live births. And the geographic location of this country also increases the susceptibility of this region to a variety of natural disasters, including earthquake, glacier lake outburst flooding, flash flooding, and drought. And during the time of disaster, approximately 10% rise in the child mortality rate has been reported in Pakistan, mainly due to the decline in breastfeeding prevalence. And as in the previous slide, I shared the whole cycle that whenever the water is contaminated, the supplies are contaminated, and formula is being offered, then many babies are ending up into diarrhea, dysentery, and resultant malnutrition. And that is even rising further the morbidities and mortalities among young babies. So, considering the whole background, the aim of my study was to explore the challenges and strategies to promote, protect, and support breastfeeding practices of internally displaced mothers who are affected by the natural disasters. And basically, I undertook the critical ethnographic study in this setting. And the key idea was to look around like the range of constraints and facilitators within the social structure of the internally displaced lactating mothers. And the key notion was to identify the gender-based factors, the socio-cultural factors, the economic factors, and geopolitical factors that are shaping the experiences of internally displaced mothers in the disaster relief camps in Pakistan. So this study I undertook in the extreme northern region in Pakistan, that was Chitral. And I traveled to the 4 different villages in Chitral, including Shali, Zetur, Bishkir, and Bombred. And in this map, you can see the red highlighted area is Chitral, where I traveled to. And the time when I was traveling to this region, this was having the active natural disasters, including the repeated and recurrent nature of earthquake and the glacier lake outburst flooding. And not only the natural disasters were happening in the time when I was like there for the data collection, this region was also facing the political instability since it was sharing boundary with Afghanistan. So this was a high risk area where population was suffering not only from the natural disasters, but also they were facing at the same time the political instability that was making the lives of breastfeeding mothers more kind of a miserable. There were many families with the young babies, and the participants that I had, especially the lactating mothers, they were living in the tents and camps at that time, and they were displaced due to the natural disaster for more than 2.5 years. I collected data in this high-risk region using the multiple methods, including in-depth interviews, the field observation, and undertaking the document analysis for the reports maintained by the health authorities in that region, the health services, as well as the humanitarian agencies, whatever documents they were maintaining for the families in that region. And the way I collected the data, I had a sample for 18 internally displaced mothers to whom I did the qualitative in-depth interviews with. They had a children aged 1 day to 36 months, and they were from the different villages in Chitral that were severely affected by natural disaster. My research was funded by International Development Research Center Canada and Sigma Nursing, and the collaborator was the Humanitarian Relief Agency based in Pakistan, that was Aga Khan Agency for Habitat. So here is a picture of like the scenario, like women were living in tent for more than 2.5 years. And when I traveled to the field, it was not an easy journey to reach to my participant and reach to each villages. As I mentioned that this region was highly politically unstable for many years, and also facing the natural disaster. So the condition of the roads were like very bad. Like you can see in the picture on the left hand side of the screen that the roads were destructed, there were landsliding happening, there were active earthquake happening in that region at the same time. And per day I was traveling to the villages, and it was taking me 3 to 6 hours to reach to the village, and another layer of 3 to 6 hour of the travel time to come back to the Chitral city. And that's how my field work was happening each day. And the moment I reached to the field site, my assumption as a researcher was that probably I would reach to a village, I would find the camps and tents right away in the village. But when I traveled to that village, I reached to there, and I saw that the residential land was covered with debris after the glacier lake outburst flooding. And there were no tents, there were no camps on the residential land. And when I asked the local people that where mothers are, where families are, they indicated me that they are living at the top of the mountains and hills just to save their lives from the glacier lake outburst flooding, because after such flooding the water level rises to an extent that even till the top of the mountain they have all water. with no supplies, with no humanitarian aid, and such a miserable life. And each time I had to reach to my participant, I had to climb the hills and mountain to be able to reach to them. And when I found that the way they were living in those tents and green shelters that were allocated by the humanitarian relief agencies, and these were not at all weatherproof. There was no washrooms available. There was no water supply available for these mothers. If they had to get the water, they had to come down from the hill. They had to travel to the river, and whatever the type of water was available, they had to just get it and then use it in whatever situation they would be there. So that was something even making their lives more challenging. And we can think that in that situation, if somebody would have fed those contaminated water to the babies, definitely the child mortality rate would have been so high in that region. So, talking about my participants, when I interviewed them, when I had the field observation, when I had the document analysis, what I understood from the whole scenario, that there was so much of the power, control, and social exploitation in the lives of those breastfeeding mothers. They were living in those tents and shelters for more than 2.5 years because recurrent disasters were not settling. Political instability was depriving them from major facilities from the government, and donor agencies were not able to reach them to provide them the food, the kind of the shelter that they should be having, and they were having no economical support. All their residential land, all their agricultural land was now covered with debris. So they were not having any option to have any kind of the crops or have their cattles and have their way of living done. So their infrastructure was lacking the safe water. There was no sanitation. There was no facilities like clean utensils. The gender based violence was quite common. Many mothers were facing the covert oppression because in the South Asian country where majority of the mothers were Muslims, and there was no privacy in those tents and shelter, and they whenever they wanted to breastfeed, people were telling them that you should be having your veil all the time, you should cover yourself, and they had no surrounding where people can provide them privacy, because in each tents and shelters there was a one or two families that were residing there with a family size of 7 to 10 people. So one can imagine that how difficult life would be in those tents and shelter where there was no privacy, no facilities for mothers. And whenever they had to breastfeed, they had to go through another layer of oppression to prove people that they really want to do something in benefit of their babies. There was also the widespread and unscreened distribution of the formula milk, and many times like people in good faith were donating the formula milk into those settings, saying that maybe this gonna help and the babies, and especially we can save the babies from the rising mortality rates. But that was not actually the case, because people were not aware that we really required the clean supplies and water that was not available, and formula was more dangerous for the babies, and breastfeed counseling or breast milk counseling was something which was not at all available. And also there were some geopolitical concerns surrounding the formula distribution at that time, and mothers were getting it, and many mothers were getting this kind of a message that maybe formula is better than breast milk. So many mothers who were previously breastfeeding, they tried to switch to the formula by thinking that maybe if I'm being given this particular donation, this is in best interest, which was not, and babies were getting more sick, and child mortality was really rising very highly. On the other hand, there was also the inequitable distribution of the humanitarian aid and food items. As I mentioned, that many families were living in the top of the mountain and hills, and they were hard to reach for many donor agencies. So those who were not affected were at times getting the supplies, and those who were affected, they were not getting the supplies. So that was another layer of the challenge, and many mothers were starving for many months and years. So you can imagine that how difficult and miserable lives were. And many moms that I interviewed, they were very, very young. They were getting married at the age of 14 or 15. And by the time they were reaching to the age of 25, they were having 5 to 6 kids. And their youngest one, it was so much challenging for them to just take care of the safety of everybody while living in those tents that was shared often by other families as well, with no sanitation and clean supply of water, making the life more challenging and difficult. As I mentioned, there wasn't any privacy, and many mothers were facing the compromised nutritional status during that time as well. And there were at times many myths surrounding the breastfeeding in the village. At times people were thinking that we should be giving babies the cow's milk, and babies were born and they were offered the unboiled cow's milk, and that was another layer of the challenge that was causing the trouble in the baby's life at that time. And there wasn't any kind of a mental health support for the mothers. There were like lots of challenges surrounding mothers, nutrition, overall care, overall hygiene practices. Mothers were not having the sanitary pads available. There were no washrooms available with the tents because they were living quite far. They were saving their lives every time by migrating from one hill to the another, one village from the other. And that was a great transition that was not only affecting breastfeeding mothers' physical health, but also affecting their emotional and mental well-being. So here I would like to share some of the recommendation, but before I share the recommendations in those settings from the perspective of mothers, I would like to introduce here the audience to the Bronfenbrenner socio-ecological model that I use as a framework to present my data and present the recommendation. So as per socio-ecological model, Bronfenbrenner basically believe that each individual is surrounded by the layers of environment, and microsystem represent the individual's personal health or personal environment, the internal environment, and the mesosystem represent the socio-cultural environment of an individual, which is the immediate layer of the environment, just like families and friends. The exosystem represent mostly the economical kind of the situation in the outer surrounding and more of an external environment to which even an individual is in the interaction with. And macro system represent the geopolitical kind of the factors that are directly and indirectly affecting the individual. And as from my data, as we can see that mothers were having the poor health, they were at times not be able to avail the social support from the healthcare providers because they were hard to reach by them, and the travel was not easy for even the donor agency and healthcare providers to reach and travel to those mountainous regions that were facing the active natural disasters and political instability at the same time. At the exosystem, we can see that there were so many economical challenges that were happening that were making the mothers more malnourished because they were not having the right supplies. The macro system, the geopolitical, as I mentioned, that political situations were not good. Humanitarian agencies were not able to reach them. At times, the inequitable distribution of aid was happening at the same time. The climate changes were causing lots of recurrent disaster in that region, and ultimately there was a kind of a forced kind of a migration for those mothers who were in those settings. So here are a few recommended interventions at the microsystem. At the maternal level, there should be the breastfeeding counseling, especially face-to-face or the virtual mode could be used. And knowledge is something that should be offered through those breastfeeding counseling, that formula is not a good option, rather mother's milk is the best option during the time of natural disaster. There should be more emphasis should be placed on maternal nutrition, especially on allocation of the additional ration and the provision of the dietary supplements to the mothers, so that we can strengthen their microsystem during the time when they were not having the good nutrition available. Also, another recommendation at the maternal level is that there should be efforts made for the mothers for their mental health, especially arranging the debriefing sessions for them, and mental health counseling for the mothers is something very, very important. At the mesosystem, where the role of support from the family, from the community, from the healthcare providers are of great importance. Mothers should be offered the social support as much as possible. Whatever the care needs to be offered, it should be very, very culturally sensitive, because at times, like I've seen that the advice that should whatever is being offered, whatever education is being offered, it should be in their own languages. If they are in a different language that they cannot read or could not understand, it would be difficult for them to grasp the content, whatever is being offered. At times, I've seen that pamphlets were circulated in English, and many mothers were actually not knowing how to read English at that time, when they were knowing more of their national language, they were knowing their local language. So that is something, one of the elements, but there are much more to the culturally sensitive care in this context. Even whatever the menstrual supply is being offered, whatever guidance is being offered, it should be shaped by their cultural kind of a norms. It should be offered in a way that is actually culturally sensitive and like something applicable in the context. They should be offered the privacy to breastfeed. And during the time of natural disaster, mothers could be offered the tents or safe spaces where they can breastfeed. Also, there is important role of empowering the local people, especially during the time of natural disaster when people can't reach those mothers. So if the local people would have been trained on breastfeeding, that would be something would really promote the breastfeeding culture in their localities, and mothers can seek the support. Another way is the peer-to-peer counseling support that could be encouraged during the time of disaster. And during my data collection, I also came to know that mothers were at times seeking spiritual support to help them sustain their breastfeeding practices. So there should be the more avenues for mothers to seek the spiritual support during the time of natural disaster. At the exosystem level, which is the outer layer, the economical factors that were even directly and indirectly affecting the mothers. So, definitely to help them be back to their regular routine, or to have some money for themselves, there should be more opportunities, more support from the government, from the donor agencies towards their economic upliftment, especially through the microfinance, through the skills building programs, and through the employment opportunities for the disaster affected individuals and families. At the geopolitical level, definitely during the time of natural disaster, when unmonitored distribution of formula milk can cause more harm than causing any benefit, there should be free banning on the free distribution of the formula milk, which is quite important. There should be the equitable distribution of the humanitarian aid so that mothers can get the good nutrition. Even the humanitarian aid should be designed keeping women in mind. At times, they were not getting any sanitary pads for their own hygiene, and they were not getting hygiene kits or anything like those supplies. And it was hard for mothers to live in those tents and with no washrooms and with no privacy. And on the other hand, they had no supply, no clothing that was even culturally sensitive. So these are few other kind of a recommendation that could be considered during that vulnerable time. There should be mother and baby friendly housing and support from the relief agencies. So overall recommendation from this research is that at the practice setting, there should be the multi-layered context-specific and interdisciplinary interventions at the micro, meso, exo, and macro level in order to promote, protect, and support breastfeeding practices of mothers in the disaster zones. There should be policies to promote, protect, and support breastfeeding during the time of emergencies that should not only be developed but also consistently be followed by all humanitarian relief agencies that are working in a specific region. At times, one humanitarian relief agency is promoting formula, but other is doing the breastfeeding counseling. And if there is no consistency, definitely the families who are going to be receiving the care will not be able to take the great advantage of the intervention. So there should be some breastfeeding policy that needs to be consistently followed by all humanitarian agencies and donor agencies. And as we know that we need more healthcare providers with the climate change happening, with disaster happening all over the world, we need professionals. We need healthcare professionals who are trained with the disaster kind of the management, especially surrounding care of women, young children. So disaster management should be a kind of a mandatory course at the undergrad and graduate level to build the capacity of the next generation of leaders and healthcare providers, especially nurses, doctors, and nutritionists and psychologists as well, who can play a great role in those settings. And also, we need more research to uncover the range of facilitators and barriers for the breastfeeding mothers who are affected by the armed conflict. As I mentioned, that in the region where I traveled to, that was facing the political instability, but we can see from the news each day that there are many disaster affected zones, but also simultaneously there are many war zones throughout the world. So there should be more research with those mothers so that we can find out the best way to help out those mothers in those settings where mothers and babies are living in such a high vulnerable state. So here are some of my publications that are available on this topic, and many of them are open access. And if you feel like accessing the full text article, and if you are most welcome to write to me in case if you couldn't find the full text article right away. And at the end, I will share my email address as well. So here are the references that I used in my today's presentation. Here are my contact details. And if there are any questions, I would be happy to take them at the end of the whole session. So thank you so much for your attentive listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hirani, for your presentation. It was a great pleasure to hear it and listen to it. Thank you for all your work. I would like to mention that Dr. Hirani is an associate professor at the University of Regina, and she is also a specialist in maternal and child health. I would like to also inform you that her work earned her numerous awards. And Dr. Hirani was also recognized by the World Health Organization and the Queen Elizabeth II Platinum Jubilee Medal. So I would like to again to thank you for your presentation. And for the next key speaker, we have Dr. Sylvia Ley, who is an assistant professor of epidemiology at Tulane University, as already mentioned. She specializes in nutrition and epidemiology, and she had a training from Harvard and the University of Toronto. She chairs also the nutritional epidemiology section of the American Society for Nutrition, and she is an associate editor for the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. Thank you, Dr. Lee, for your presentation, and we would like to hear it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me this morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you might be. So I'll be focusing on talking about women's health, how lactation can impact women's health. And my work is mostly focusing on US and Canada. So we're moving into North America now. So as many of you may know, in normal pregnancy, women undergo changes in carbohydrate and lipid metabolism. And this causes women to have a compromised insulin sensitivity later in pregnancy. And ideally, that would improve after giving birth of child. And there have been some evidence indicating that lactation, breastfeeding children can help with the speedy recovery of a woman's health. And so to look at some short-term studies, here we have 3 months postpartum study where we are looking at the disposition index. On a y-axis, we have increasing insulin secretion, and x-axis, we have increasing insulin sensitivity. The idea is that this curve will move towards the axis as you progress to diabetes. And when we looked at the 3 months postpartum, breastfeeding women tend to have this curve sitting higher, so away from the progression of diabetes. So at least in the short term, it seems that there is a benefit of breastfeeding in insulin secretion and sensitivity of breastfeeding women. And some of the longer term studies demonstrated in this meta-analysis looking at breastfeeding women and their later disease development of type 2 diabetes. It seems that women who breastfed tend to have a lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes across all the studies they looked at in this meta-analysis. Similar trend was seen when you look at the cardiovascular disease. These are the women who breastfed earlier in their younger year life, and looking at the cardiovascular disease development later in life. Here you can see that across all the studies, we are looking at hazard ratio below 1. So consistently, breastfeeding tend to be associated with the lower risk of cardiovascular disease. And even when we look at the subtype of cardiovascular disease, coronary heart disease, stroke, and fatal cardiovascular disease, it seems to have a protective impact. So what I was interested in was women who experience gestational diabetes during pregnancy. So we know that women who experience gestational diabetes are at higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease later in their life. And also what's concerning is that in a short term, these women tend to have difficulty breastfeeding in early postpartum. So we will unpack these gaps. So here is some of the earlier work looking at women, about a little over 1,000 women with 155 incident cases of gestational diabetes. Even in this smaller sample size, we can see the trend of longer duration of lactation having lower incidence of diabetes. Although the error bars are rather large. So this is promising. And this is the same study looking at the crude incidence rate of type 2 diabetes. And although the confidence intervals are large, we can see that breastfeeding or lactating tend to have a lower incidence rate of diabetes. So we wanted to look at this in larger cohort with a larger sample size, diabetes women's health study, which is a combination of a women's health study in US and Danish national birth cohort from Denmark. My presentation today will focus on the studies from the nurses' health study. So this study this nurses' health study 2 started in 1989, and every 2 years they followed women over time. They have more than 100,000 women followed up, and over 6,000 women within that cohort developed diabetes, developed gestational diabetes. So we followed specifically those women, and we collected additional biospecimen samples to look at some of the biomarkers. So this is an overall prospective cohort study with a sample size of more than 100,000 women. We have over 6,000 women with gestational diabetes, and we have blood samples from slightly under 1,000 women collected in their middle life. And we also have assessed the lactation history using the questionnaire at multiple times. This allowed us to look at the total duration of lactation. So the total duration meaning the not just one child, but entire their reproducing lifetime time of the lactation. So you will be adding up all the lactating time, and then we can come up with a total duration of lactation, as well as exclusive lactation only. The duration was also calculated. So here we are looking at the baseline characteristics from a little over 4,000 women. Here we have a categories of increasing duration of lactation for different baseline characteristics. I assume that characteristics were similar across the categories of duration of lactation. So now we are looking at the association between the duration of lactation on the outcome of the development of type 2 diabetes among the women with the gestational diabetes. It seemed that longer duration of lactation was associated with the lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes in these women, even after adjusting for body mass index. Here we're looking at the outcome of exclusive lactation. Again, we are seeing quite powerful association with the hazard ratio of a 0.7 here among those with the exclusive lactation of more than 12 months. So again, here we are seeing the trend of exclusive lactation being associated with the lower risk of type 2 diabetes. We looked at some of the glucose biomarkers in middle age, and we saw that insulin was lower among those with the longer duration of lactation. C-peptide was lower among those with the longer duration of lactation. And then we further looked at some other biomarkers, such as inflammation, lipids, and liver enzyme biomarkers. And we saw that the inflammatory markers were lower among those who breastfed for a longer duration, indicating perhaps the mechanism involved in this progression to diabetes, and in relation to breastfeeding may be inflammation related. And then here we are looking at the outcome of chronic inflammation defined as greater than 3 milligrams per liter. And we saw in this logistic regression the longer breastfed women were had a lower risk of having the chronic inflammation. So here is another paper that looked at the cardiovascular disease outcome in the same cohort, same woman, and we saw even cardiovascular disease outcome among these gestational diabetes experienced women. We saw the association between longer duration of breastfeeding and lower risk of cardiovascular disease and coronary heart disease. So we determined that women who breastfed a longer duration is associated with the lower risk of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease by their middle age, even if they had a history of gestational diabetes. So this answers the question about the long-term health of these women with the gestational diabetes, but we still have this question about what about the difficulty in breastfeeding early postpartum among the women who experience gestational diabetes. So we already talked quite a bit about putting baby to the breast early. That's pretty much where we are going with. The first presenter has presented a rather detailed information about WHO recommendations. Just to give you some background on the physiology for those who are not as familiar, women experience lactogenesis. All women experience lactogenesis of milk coming in late pregnancy and early postpartum. So lactogenesis 1 occurs in late pregnancy, and lactogenesis 2 occurs usually after giving birth. And it's been documented women with the gestational diabetes are higher risk at delayed milk coming in after giving birth. So this is work led by my master's student, and she looked at whether the metabolic or the obstetric risk parameters were associated with the timing of milk coming in. So this study was conducted in Canada, Toronto, Canada. And this is clinical examination data with the characterizing women through clinical examination from during pregnancy through first year of postpartum. So we have conducted oral glucose tolerance tests in this woman at different times, as well as we have a detailed questionnaire collected during the first week of women's postpartum or first week of postpartum, capturing the timing of milk coming in, the lactogenesis 2. So we have recruited 271 women during pregnancy in a hospital setting. After applying the inclusion-exclusion criteria for current secondary analysis, we have 177 women included in this analysis. So we defined a delayed onset of lactogenesis 2 as lactogenesis occurring greater than 72-hour postpartum. And interestingly, we did not see any significant association between women's metabolic health during pregnancy and the delayed onset of lactogenesis based on the detailed metabolic measures that we looked at, insulin measures, fasting glucose measures, and even adiponectin measures. None of these were associated. But what did come up as significantly associated with was a delayed timing of putting baby to the breast. So greater than 2 hours after giving birth, putting baby to the breast. Dr. Hirani already mentioned that WHO recommends putting baby to the breast within the first hour after giving birth. And some of these women were putting baby to breast at rather delayed time. And that seems to be significantly associated with delayed onset of lactogenesis too. So this really highlights what's important, even for the women with the compromised metabolic status during pregnancy. Following the recommended obstetrical practices really can help these women. And just to highlight again, that we recommend women putting baby to the breast within the first hour, and that seems to be rather important. And we know very well that progression of metabolic disease occur early in life, and much work have been done on intervention of diet and lifestyle in early or young adulthood to prevent this progression to diabetes and cardiovascular disease. Not much have been talked about the importance or the role of lactation on this progression of the disease, and perhaps it's time to talk more about that. So that pretty much concludes my presentation on the role of lactation on cardiovascular disease progression of women later in life. And I'm happy to take any questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lei. We know that our last speaker, Dr. Schenker, is here with us, and I would like to introduce her. She is a co-founder of the Human Milk Foundation, which operates the UK's first non-profit independent human milk bank. She leads research and innovation in lactation and human milk science and advises on safer medications and vaccinations. Dr. Schenker was awarded an MBA in 2023 for her work in charity and human milk banking. Yes, we can see it, and we are really happy to have you with us, and we are glad that you managed to connect with us.
Well, it was, yes, I literally walked into the place. I know I can get good Wi-Fi about 10 seconds before you introduced me, so forgive me if I'm a little breathless. Great, it's really good to be here and to listen to as many of the talks as I could, or as much of them at least. But my name's Natalie Schenker. I'm a UKRI Future Leaders Fellow at Imperial College London. But my entire career has really sidetracked from being a trainee in paediatric surgery into setting up what's very much preventative healthcare services in terms of human milk banking. So today I just want to talk you through how I got interested, what the research we're doing is really focusing on, and what opportunities there are for future collaborative research in the future. So essentially, as the other two speakers really carefully outlined, milk is not about nutrition. It's about an entire complex developmental programming tool, which started to evolve over 200 million years ago. And essentially, This image shows an egg, a fossilized egg, representing what our previous mammalian progenitor organisms would have been coping with. Essentially a very arid, very dry environment, which they were laying their eggs from which our mammalian ancestors would hatch. And those mothers, mammalian mothers, who could secrete a small amount of fluid from their ventral, their abdomen, thorax, gave those eggs an evolutionary advantage because they allowed them not to dry out in this very dry environment. Now, over the millennia, milk evolved to develop short-chain sugars, what we know now as oligosaccharides. And human milk has over 200 described oligosaccharides, which perform an enormously complex role in terms of fattening the gut microbiome, the gut development, and many, many functions of that. So it's seen how diverse mammals have become. And there are three main classes, those like the platypuses that still lay eggs, those like kangaroos, marsupials, which carry the young in pouches, and then the placental mammals, which humans are one type. And the only reproductive strategy that is shared with all mammals is lactation. And that's critically important because lactation really matters, and not just for infant development, but for the postnatal recovery and future health. The more we know about it, the more complex that happening is. So we do a lot of public engagement work, and one of those projects is to create infographics like this, which really convey the complexity of human science through looking at the different classifications of components. You'll see just by looking at an instant on this slide that if we look over on the right, the number of fatty acids and antimicrobial factors. And that really describes how human milk has evolved to meet the needs of our species, which if we look at how we differ from other mammals, it's pretty much all in our brains. Speed of thought, capacity to problem solve as a species. And those fatty acids available during development are absolutely critical for the infant's brain. And clearly, protecting them from a very hostile environment, we need layers and layers of antimicrobial factors. So there's really a new paradigm of disease and health developing. And that's building on the existing paradigm that our risk of disease is very much set not only by our genetic susceptibility that we're born with, that we learned, but also the environment that we live in, undiet, sleep to smoke, drink alcohol, or whatever it might be. Even stress levels, finding Wi-Fi in the cafe that seems to have turned the music up, so I apologise if you can't hear something. But the new paradigm is very much about the role of the microbiome, the concept of bacteria, fungi, viruses, bacteriophages even, in each of our organ systems is different and is really patterned primarily in the period of infancy. And certain interventions during infancy, how the baby is born, what that baby is exposed to in terms of clean environment or normal, non-sanitized environment, all of those factors are overridden by how the baby is fed. And breastfeeding contains an entire panoply of elements that help to support a nice, healthy gut microbiome. Now, my own field is in maternal health and lactation, how those two intersect. And it's a really fascinating area because Alison Stubbe in the States gives a really interesting talk where she talks about the concept of the mother being very much discarding the birth of the baby. She describes the pregnant woman being the wrapped chocolate in a whole box of chocolates, and that it's very exciting. People want to know what's inside. But then when the baby's born, the chocolate is really what we're interested in, and the wrapper, the mother, is very much discarded. But if we look at the evidence of all of the disease processes, some of which talked about today, that lactation impacts the future risk. in an inverse relationship, then you'll see that really lactation is an opportunity to reset maternal risk of future disease on top of all of the short-term benefits in terms of mental health and physical recovery.
I'm really sorry for interrupting you. I would like to ask you maybe if you can put your mic a bit higher so we can hear you better.
Hang on a second.
Sure.
Excuse me. Hi, so just to turn the music down for 10. Thank you.
Just if you, yes, I think if the mic is we can hear you better if the mic is near
Well,
your.
We can all
Yes.
start dancing away, but I am literally sat in an empty cafe.
Yes. I totally understand you. No
Anyway,
worries.
I don't need to tell you all just what a challenge this is, that globally breastfeeding rates at 6 months are fewer than 50% of babies still being breastfed. In the UK, we have some of the lowest breastfeeding rates in the entire world. And if we can find interventions that work here to correct that and to support families who want to breastfeed their babies, then that would truly be a great gift, I believe, to both maternal and infant public health. In the UK, only 1 in 200 babies are breastfed at a year. The latest data that was collected is back in 2010. So we're hoping to have a national feeding survey data release next. I've turned the music off again. Next year, I am sorry. But we're very much operating.
Don't worry. Yeah, we are glad to have you here. Don't worry.
My favorite talk out of this. Anyway, so effectively, if we can find solutions in the UK, then perhaps there's a way that we can ripple out across the world into contexts to see what works. Because the opportunity is huge. As Keith Hansen in the Lancet series in 2016 noted, breastfeeding didn't already exist. Someone who invented it today deserved a Nobel Prize in medicine and economics. So what's the opportunity? Well, you can see from this graph, the orange line shows the UK's fairly awful breastfeeding rates, in that the 2010 data shows that fewer than 25% of babies are exclusively breastfed at 6 months. But I show this not to cause depression, but as a source of hope. Because if we look at the green line, they had similar breastfeeding rates to ours now in the UK back in the 1970s. And essentially at that point, a group of public health doctors, epidemiologists, community health workers got together and implemented a set of 3 policies. Firstly, they managed to implement the entire WHO code into law. They then instituted a network of community health workers across the country. And beyond that, they developed a network of human milk banks, which is still the most complete donor service in the country. And their breastfeeding rates, you'll see from this graph, transformed. So that by 1 year, over 50% of babies are still receiving breastfeeding. That's surely as a result of this combination of policies. So this was largely the impetus behind setting up the Hearts Milk Bank, the UK's first non-profit independent human milk bank outside of the National Health Service. And myself and Gillian Weaver stepped out of the National Health Service because of the frustration that we simply couldn't get anybody to take this seriously. But the idea was that if we could create a milk bank large enough to provide equitable access so that clinicians knew it was available and assured provision of donor milk, then finally the clinical trials that are so desperately needed. As data goes up to 2022, but the milk banks now provide over 400 litres of donor milk each year. We launched a charity in 2018, the Human Milk Foundation, which has just celebrated its 6th birthday, 1st of August. And that charity was set up because we were immediately contacted by families in desperate need of access to donor milk for a range of reasons. We couldn't get that funded. In 2019, I was awarded a 7-year fellowship through the Research Innovation through the Research Council, which enabled us to create a whole program of research around all aspects of human health. And that work really hasn't looked back. We were very much fueled by what happened during the pandemic, which brought together not only all milk banks, not all, but milk banks from certainly over 45 different countries, into an organisation called the Global Alliance of Milk Banks and Associations. And Gillian and I set that up effectively to mitigate the worst effects of the pandemic. Because the reason we don't have a national service, so we don't have a global milk banking infrastructure, and the reason that 800,000 premature babies as a result globally don't have assured access to donor milk is because of HIV. And because the pandemic in the 1980s effectively introduced a risk that was deemed too great to withstand. So milk banks were closed then, and have very much been involved since then. So the group that I've established at Imperial works very closely with Imperial College and the Human Milk Foundation to put in place a panel of funded research in all aspects of maternal health, milk banking, and human science. I just want to talk for a couple of minutes about the community program. That program that we founded the charity to fund, which was really spearheaded by Joe Watt, IBCLC, who was in lactation services for 6 years at Hearts Milk Bank. He's just retired this year, but still very much involved in the work. She and the team have now supported over 700 families who present for a whole range of reasons. Either they would like to establish breastfeeding but are struggling with low milk supply, or there's a reason that breastfeeding is simply impossible. And that can be because they've been diagnosed with cancer, or they're currently taking antibiotic medication to prevent breastfeeding. And so we developed a protocol pathway for referral to make sure that donor milk could be used as equitably as possible. The charity established a prioritisation panel, which consists of donors and recipients, third sector organisations, charities, healthcare professionals, and so on, to advise how we should be prioritising very precious but limited supplies of donor. And essentially decided that vulnerability should be prioritised. And about 80% of the milk provided from Hearts Milk goes to over 50 NHS hospitals. But if there was a chance of supporting mother's maternal health, well-being, or supporting breastfeeding, then as long as the milk bank could meet, then we will try to provide. Babies who have no access to milk and mother's milk at all can receive donor milk for 4 weeks. A minimum of 4 weeks. We try to push it for a few weeks longer if possible. But we don't have research on whether that's safe for babies. Donor milk has been heat treated, gone through multiple freeze cycles. It's never going to be equivalent to maternal milk. So we need to be cautious in how donor milk is used and make sure that that's always in the context of research until we've got consent. This is one of our community recipients, Karen. His mum contacted us after he was hospitalised with seizures when he was only 2 years old, and he was since diagnosed with a life-limiting condition called polygyria. It has a very poor prognosis. There's 100 described cases, and most of them are bedbound. But Karen's mother is quite exceptional. She persevered with her own lactation and with access to donor milk. And she received donor milk for about 6 weeks until she was able to establish a full milk supply. Karen's seizures greatly abated once the baby was human milk fed. And he's now attending school and just starting to walk age 6. And it's just really exceptional child. But you'll see from the graph that over half of families, not 660 families on this graph, present with low milk supply. And about 65 to 70% of those go on to breastfeed completely, with the remainder largely feeding for longer than expected. And you'll see other conditions in its too. But essentially, the reasons that mothers don't have breast tissue, the rural health needs, implications that prevent breastfeeding. Given babies adopted through surrogacy, through and sadly during the pandemic, it wasn't unusual to support So one of the most fruitful research collaborations has been with Professor Amy Brown at Swansea University, who's a social scientist and psychologist. And she's really looked into the impact of availability of donor milk on the well-being of parents and mental health. And we conducted this mixed methods survey of parents, which received over 100 responses, including quite a few from families. And what we found in looking at the themes of their responses of how they felt to receive donor milk, we found 7 mild feelings. The first being relief that their baby had access to donor milk for their own health, but then they described feeling cared for, supported, that they felt listened to, that their feeding choices were validated if they wanted to avoid food. And they really felt it reduced the pressure in the early days, which they then contributed to their outcomes. The respondents felt that it really helped with the complex emotions of not being able to breastfeed, and the links between developing postnatal depression and feeling dependencies are very well described. The mothers described of emotional protection about being able to continue their breastfeeding journey for longer than they might have done. But it wasn't all positive. It did have negative reactions from the family and friends. There is a yuck factor, a disgust factor around receiving other mothers' milk, other mothers' milk or babies. And that's something that we really need to understand how we develop to describe the service. Now, that should read parental rather than paternal health, although fathers were included in this study too. But we conducted a second survey that asked parents about their own mental well-being at the point that they contacted the milk bank for support, but then 2 weeks after that support finished. And you'll see we asked them to complete hospital anxiety and depression scores, where they all showed this is a median anxiety and depression for service. And these are highly elevated, rated and moderately elevated scores. But the likely line after the intervention is that these scores normalized. Now, that isn't some magic property of donor milk, but it's to do with the patients who go to the services, which the other speakers. So, where are we going next? Well, there is a great imperative to create equitable services, that if there are benefits we know to donors for being able to be recruited and to donate milk, especially after perinatal trauma, birth trauma, or a sick baby, or even a baby who's died, then there's great value for those willing to be able to donate milk. We've created a network of hubs shown in red across the UK, including in Wales, which has no milk banking services, and we're aiming to develop that network. But I just want to spend the last couple of minutes just talking about the Norfolk project. Norfolk is a wonderful county on the coast of East Anglia in England. And we were approached by the county council to see if we could design a project that would increase access across the county to milk banking services. So that project is now a month into a year-long process. Frankly, we're all quite delighted with that. We're aiming to support mothers with diabetes during pregnancy so that they can create feeding plans, which include donor milk if their baby needs supplementation, with a view to supporting longer term breastfeeding. We're also aiming to work with a local panel, a Finland prioritization offshoot of the Charities Cooperative, to understand what infant and maternal needs need to be met in the community beyond diabetes. We're setting up hubs across Norfolk to facilitate donation and use of donor milk. families outside hospitals, training healthcare professionals, community midwives, and visitors who in the UK work with families in the first 2 years of life, and support 50 donors, increase access to being able to donate milk. Now we have a target of 50 for the year. Within a month, we've recruited 30, so I think things are going quite well. But managing the demand is going to be a huge part of this project. So to answer the question now of who benefits from milk banking services, clearly it is the extremely vulnerable babies for whom rates of necrotizing infections, retinopathy and prematurity, and lots of other complications of being induced to reduce when being fed with human milk. But also older babies who currently aren't eligible for the National Health Service. It's the mothers, those who have cancer or UVA, who manage to maintain their own lactation throughout treatment, use donor milk for the injury, and then go back to breastfeeding. And donors like Adira here, who had a huge oversupply. She was producing an extra 2 litres of her own milk a day, who donated nearly 100 litres of milk herself. But Joe, a lactation consultant, worked with her to manage that supply. And so there wasn't a need for her to sell milk to a commercial company. And although there are benefits to donors being able to receive compensation for what they do, there are real concerns about commercialisation in this sector and how that's driving potential risks to both recipients and donors. Healthcare professionals talk regularly about babies going home earlier than they might have expected if they're fed with human milk. And it's supporting a whole program of research that's sustained globally through the Blue Movements. So I will gloss over the modelling work on costings service, but please do look out for a paper to be published next month in Archives of Disease and Childhood with this brilliant collaboration with a health economist at the University of Warwick, showing how much it costs to produce a litre of milk. The spoiler on that study is that it's much more than milk banks are currently gaining cost recovery processes, which possibly explains some of the stress and the fact we can't afford decent Wi-Fi at the moment. So the next stage, which is entered phase 2 of the fellowship programme, you'll see a whole group of implementation studies, including technical innovation, really looking to drive efficiency and assess sustainability, with a view to establishing formal clinical trials in the next 5 years that can answer many questions about how and why and to who our service should be advertised. Essentially, I will gloss over the rest in the interest of time, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and we really appreciate that you took the time and you invested in this presentation and you wanted
They've
to
turned
attend.
the music down just as I've stopped.
Yes, yes, we understand it, and we really appreciate that you did your best to attend this webinar.
Thank you.
For now, we had a question, and I would like to answer it, to read it from the chat. It was addressed to Dr. Sheila Hirani, and the question was, how can a man get involved in the breastfeeding process? So, Dr. Sheila, if you would like to read your response.
Yeah, thank you so much for this important question. I really appreciate that. And I would say that men can actually play an important role in promoting, protecting, and supporting breastfeeding practices of women in many ways. As a spouse, like they can actually help their spouses, like in providing the breastfeeding support, and especially they can even support their wives who is breastfeeding and sharing the household responsibilities, or even by providing the skin-to-skin contact to the babies. And that something will actually help the baby to create a kind of a bonding relationship and good bond with the parents. And apart from that, if they are the healthcare providers, definitely men can play the great role in educating fathers. sometimes like as I in my presentation, I highlighted the importance of culturally sensitive care. So one of the element in most of the culture is that women are more comfortable women and men are more comfortable with men. And in that situation, like men can, as a healthcare providers, can play an important role in educating other fathers that why breastfeeding is a best option for the baby as compared to any other mode of feeding. And they can even provide the education on the number of other ways that fathers can support their spouse in successfully breastfeeding the baby. Apart from that, male healthcare providers or professionals or even men in general can support the breastfeeding by advocating for the safe spaces. And as like I mentioned in disaster, like I've seen the great role of men in those villages. They were really supporting their wives in whatever ways, and some were creating a kind of a small tent with the scarves and other kind of the stuff, whatever they had, and they were creating a separate corner for their wives so that they can actually breastfeed in some corners in the mountains wherever they were getting the chance. And even like some of the participants, the breastfeeding mothers mentioned in my study that at times they really wait for their husband, that when they are back, then they both go to a corner spot where she feed her baby. And that would have not been a possibility without the support from the spouse. So men can actually do wonders. They can do so much of the advocacy, education, internal, external support, lots other things. And definitely at the household level, like in my participants, like in the study that I undertook with the disaster affected individuals, I saw that women were not having the very good amount of food in the household. There were some spouses who were encouraging their wives, they should eat well so that they can look after the kids and feed the babies well. So another important role of promoting a kind of a gender equality at the household level and at a societal level is another kind of the great work by men. And I really appreciate the question once again. Thank you.
Thank you very much for answering it. It's a great pleasure to hear it. And we also think that the role of a father is really important. I would like to give the chance to our speakers if they have some comments or some thoughts regarding the other presentations, then you can share with us and we can discuss together.
I just
I
want to
just-
have oh, sorry.
No, you go.
Okay.
Sarah.
Okay. I just want to comment on the father's role. In research settings, we're trying to include more and more of fathers in addition to mother and baby. We often have difficulty recruiting fathers, so we encourage fathers to join research studies so we can have a more data and information about how we can help fathers to support breastfeeding.
Yes, I just wanted to add that fathers and the whole wider family is absolutely key to ensuring success. Certainly at the milk bank, we regularly receive fathers coming to collect milk, cooler bag and the ice packs, sometimes the grandparents, sometimes the aunties and uncles. It really does take a village. And although that village often doesn't look like villages would have looked traditionally 200, 500,000 years ago, it still does take more than the individual mother battling away through all of the barriers to create that breastfeeding relationship.
Thank you for sharing this with us. I would like to read a question that we also received it via Q&A section. Recently, we saw a human breast milk bank in Pakistan getting banned. Was initially approved, but later far religious groups were banned. So the question is, what do you think? How a healthcare provider can do something regarding this, or if they can take some action?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And something that Amina Hatia, who is a researcher and a midwife in the team, is doing a tremendous amount of work on it at the moment. And indeed, if anybody wanted to contact her to talk more about what has happened in Pakistan, she'll be very interested to hear from me. So the concept of milk kinship, it really comes from the concept of Rida, where family bonds are created in a number of ways, but through sharing. And that's a completely special aspect of Islamic culture that helps to foster bonds at all sorts of ways within the family and community. But clearly, modern human milk banking then throws a little bit of a curveball in terms of how that belief system is interpreted in the context of milk structure. Now, there are ways that Muslim majority countries have found to navigate this based on the different strands of Islamic belief and what is practiced in that country. And indeed, in Iran, there was approval given by the Ayatollah 20 years ago now, and now there's over 20 milk banks across Europe. And the same is true in Kuwait with the Sunni belief system, where anonymity can be waived in terms of donating milk, with an introductory process where families are introduced to each other to enable women to be able to then donate that milk to milk banks. So there is no fixed barrier that cannot be brought through, I believe, if everybody is brought to the table and given a chance to ask questions and to explore. Any working groups, Council Group Britain, British Medical Association, and local scholars from all different places and communities to understand what the barriers would be and how best manage the functions. People need information, and they need information much earlier than tests. It's already assured when they if you're then having to think through the ramifications of what might happen in 30 minutes' time when kinship beliefs, which then mean that that family is linked forever and the children are effectively siblings, it's too much when you're already incredibly stressed. So what information needs to be provided, how is that information distributed, and so on. These are all questions that can be thought through now. I fully believe that there's a way forward in Pakistan, just as there was in Malaysia when there were also concerns from extremists. Shouldn't be practiced. But they have a function of
Thank you very much for answering these questions, and we hope that in Pakistan we will have better policies regarding this breastfeeding. I would like to address a question to Dr. Hirani. So about the role of others in promoting breastfeeding, how this role and the breastfeeding can be promoted in public.
Very important question. I would say that promoting breastfeeding public is something that I have been doing even in Canada, high-income country, but still feel that lots of advocacy is being required. So if somebody talking about the context of low middle income country, they may be thinking, oh, this is a problem in here because of the cultural aspects. But even this is something so much a problematic thing in the context of the high-income countries or even in the Western world, since I have lived and worked in both the contexts. And I can assure you that the problem that we see in different parts of the world is still existing in the different forms. Women are facing so much of the trouble whenever they are trying to breastfeed their babies in their workplaces or in their educational institutions or even in the public transit, in the shopping malls, even in the aeroplanes while they are traveling on the long haul flight. They are facing so much of the criticism regardless of their country of origin, regardless of their culture, because overall breastfeeding is not normalized, considered normalized in many part of the world. Still people feel that this is something a kind of depicting a private part or like doing something which is unreasonable, and many times women are being stigmatized. So I would say that lots and lots of advocacy is being required actually to promote breastfeeding in variety of public places. And interestingly, each public places had different type of a protocol. And I've worked a lot for the mothers who are in the post-secondary institutions or even in the workplaces. And there have been a movement that was created to support and protect and promote their breastfeeding practices. So through lots of advocacy, at times you have to meet with the city governors, you have to meet with the city councillor, the workplace setting supervisors, you have to form a working group, involve the stakeholders to bring a kind of a policy so that it is being something in written that women will be supported in this particular placement. So I would say, number one, lots of advocacy gonna be required. Number two, lots of interdisciplinary work. You have to see outside in your domain and collaborate with people who are the stakeholders, who are the policy makers, bring everybody and make sure that the voices of those who are facing the challenges are being heard. So even involving breastfeeding mothers as a partner in those working groups is something that can bring out the best. And giving the example of workplaces, like I tried to bring change in those workplaces settings that were educational, and lots of time had to be like placed forward for bringing a change in policies. But many workplaces did adopt the idea and by the idea of having a breastfeeding room, having a privacy, flexibility for the mothers who are working and also having the young babies, because definitely they require a pumping time while at work or while studying. So that's something gonna be a kind of a long-term work that has to be done in collaboration and lots of advocacy and education. And recently I came across a kind of a scenario where I was advocating for a breastfeeding room in the universities, and somebody told me that few decades ago breastfeeding room was in placed in the female washroom. And I told them that this gonna be something more unhygienic kind of an option for babies. Do we ever eat as an adult in the washrooms? If I give you somebody a sandwich and I say, go and eat in the washroom, they say, what you are talking about? So why to have a similar kind of a discrimination for the babies? When they are breastfeeding, they are actually that's their meal, that's their food. So how like reasonable it would be to send the babies and mothers in the washroom? That's not something their placement. Definitely they require the privacy in the spaces other than the washrooms. If they're in a shopping mall, maybe some corner could be designed low cost kind of a breastfeeding tent within the shopping mall, or like in the public spot like those where some functions are holding. And even in the aeroplane there could be a kind of separate corner. And I've written various articles on those challenges and way forward and some of those strategies. And if you're interested, I would be happy to share the link with the audience who are interested on this topic. But thank you so much for this question.
Thank you so much for your detailed answer. And we hope that we will get better policies. And I think your work is really good. And we appreciate all that you do in this domain. We have received a question via email, and I would like to address it to all of the key speakers that we have. The question is, which amino acids are most crucial for a breastfeeding mother to ensure her child's well-being, particularly in protecting against chromosome mutations, mitochondrial dysfunction, lysosomal issues, and heart problems? Are tryptophan, lysine, acetylcysteine, and arginine especially important for this purpose?
Do you want me to jump in, or does anyone have burning information?
Sure, please.
Okay, so in terms of chromosomal abnormalities, mitochondrial issues, lysosomal issues, breastfeeding will not affect that. That is already programmed during pregnancy into that child's life course. In terms of what amino acids are essential for cardiac development, I don't think the data is that clear, but I think it's really important that women don't feel they have to aspire to a different sort of diet, to a healthy diet, to a particular supplement or whatever is being sold towards them to have better outcomes. Women just need to eat, and they need to eat a little bit more when they're lactating, because it takes quite a lot of energy to produce milk, possibly between 20 and 25% higher metabolic load. So you get really hungry. And to be honest, I've just finished off a chocolate brownie, which was my lunch because it's been that sort of a day. And that is fine. If I was lactating, it'd still produce equally good milk than if I just had a smoked salmon with avocado. Because lactation is really clever as an evolutionary strategy, and it prioritizes what goes into the milk over what the maternal reserves are. So the reason the mother should eat a healthy, balanced diet if at all possible, and if she can afford it, which is really critical, I think, is for her own health. Because we know that in terms of vitamin D metabolism, bone metabolism, lactation will suck calcium out of bones, because it's what makes milk white. There's lots of calcium in there for the baby. And that's true in all sorts of metabolic contexts. But there are really clever mechanisms in the female body which protect her against the worst excesses of lactation, or else, frankly, we wouldn't have a species. And one of those has recently been published in Nature, described as a novel brain hormone, CCN3, which explains the mystery of why women who breastfeed are protected against osteoporosis in later life, even though they lack estrogen, which drops postnatally and remains low during lactation. And what this novel mechanism does is it produces a chemical CCN3, which then promotes bone remodeling, stem cell regeneration within bones, and seems to protect against fractures, at least in animal models, and some suggestion that is present in human females as well. So you cannot have an evolutionary strategy that's over 200 million years old without it being astonishingly complicated and really quite useful for the majority of the population. And so when it comes to messaging about diets, honestly, just feed the women and let nature sort everything else out. And as with cravings during pregnancy, if a woman is deficient, then generally she will want to eat the sorts of foods naturally that she needs. But the expectation that she needs to eat in a certain way possibly sets up another barrier, especially for women who don't have choices about what they can eat. That really doesn't need to be. That's a great question.
I would like to add about the women's health perspective and the long-term health outcome. As women progresses to the chronic disease development, such as diabetes and cardiovascular disease, of course, we know that diet and lifestyle is important. And we know that now it seems that lactation has some role. What we don't know as much is about the mechanism on the progression of this disease, which would have a better understanding of what kind of intervention may be the most effective in early adulthood and mid-adulthood as well for this woman. So we have some ongoing work going on trying to pull the large sample size of a cohort studies of women on metabolomics data to see what the mechanism may be on the progression of cardiometabolic disease among these lactating women. So a lot more will be coming up in the next few years. So stay tuned.
It's great to hear this, and I appreciate all the comments. I would like to ask you, the key speakers, if they have some other comments or thoughts that they would like to share with us today. If not, we can close the webinar. I would like to answer the question that we have in the Q&A section. Regarding the presentation, I would like to mention that the webinar it's recorded and will be available on the event page. And if our speakers agree regarding sharing the presentation via email, we can also send it to participants. But we have to make sure that the key speakers agree with this. I would like to thank you very much for joining us today. It was a great pleasure for us and for the participants. We hope to also organize more webinars like this and to see you there. Enjoy the rest of the week.